It is day 6 of the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. We officially finished the prosecution's initial direct questioning of Caroline Ellison. And oh my God, there was so much that came out in court today. I mean, Caroline was on the stand 8 hours, literally all day, except for our break for lunch. And at the very end of the day, we started to get into the cross-examination, but that was cut short. Cross-examination will really begin tomorrow. So today, I'm just gonna talk you through so many different things that came up in Caroline's testimony, and I'm still probably not gonna get to every single detail. My setup is a little different. You might notice I have an event tonight. I am interviewing Raul Pal, if folks are familiar with Raul. In just a few moments here, I'm at the event, and I am doing this in a side room because I wanna make sure that you don't miss a minute of this trial. Okay, first I wanna say something, which is that people commented that I didn't say anything about Caroline and Sam's relationship in yesterday's video. It has come up in the trial, but not that much. We got a general timeline from Caroline. She said they started sleeping together in 2018, then they started dating in 2020 to 2021, they broke up, they started dating again later. So we got a little bit of that, and we did, towards the end of today and a little bit yesterday, get some insight into the nature of their relationship, which she described as she wanted more from him, more emotional intimacy, more attention, etc., and he really didn't give it to her, and that there was this power dynamic where he definitely was the one with the power in the two of their relationship. So that's what we've gotten, really. There's been no talk of orgies, much to, I think, some people's chagrin. So nothing super juicy or salacious on that side of things. Okay. With that out of the way, today's testimony was interesting. There was a lot of time spent in spreadsheets, as with yesterday. I'm gonna get into some of that today and try and keep it as clear as possible without having the actual exhibits to show folks. And then the back half of the day was a bit emotional. Caroline cried on the stand. We'll talk about the context in which that happened. So we're gonna get into it. Before we do, I do need to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, OpenSea, Web3Sense, Ledger. I wanna hear from them real briefly right here because nothing would be possible without them. So thank you to our sponsors. Check out the links in the show notes, show them some love.
Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it.
Okay, so our time in the first half of today was really spent talking about how Caroline manipulated balance sheets that she sent to lenders, so third-party lenders who lent money to Alameda to trade with. Those balance sheets were manipulated, and we spent a lot of time talking about how that happened, and at every turn, Caroline made it very clear that everything she did was at the behest of Sam. It almost became a joke. I mean, if I had a flask in there, it would be a drinking game, right? Like, everything was like, well, at Sam's direction. Well, Sam told me this, that. Like, she was very well trained that she made sure she got that line in there, always. And this conversation really kicked off by talking about June 2022. I've talked about this before. This was a key period in the history of this entire situation and a key moment in the history of crypto, because what happened right before June, in May, you had the Terra Luna collapse and you had this contagion starting to spread where there was a lot of financial crisis happening in the industry. So in June of 2022, a lot of lenders started to recall their loans with Alameda, basically say, hey, we need our money back. Genesis was one of those. And Genesis also, in June of 2022, started asking Caroline for balance sheets. So basically Alameda's balance sheet, saying, we want to understand a little bit better how the money's doing, what's going on, what your books look like. And Caroline said this caused her some stress because she didn't really want to share Alameda's balance sheets because frankly, they didn't look as good as she felt that they should. So what Caroline did was prepare a relatively honest balance sheet, and I'll caveat that in a second. Caroline prepared a relatively honest balance sheet that could be sent to Genesis. But instead she sent it to Sam, and this apparently all happened over Signal, so we don't have visuals of this chat specifically. She sent the honest spreadsheet to Sam, and she said, I don't think we can send this to Genesis because we look too risky, basically, and her concern was that they would recall even more loans or share the document with others and that it could cause crisis for Alameda and for FTX. So she said to Sam, hey, here's the honest balance sheet. I don't think we probably want to send this to Genesis. What do you think? And he said, yeah, definitely can't send that to Genesis. Please prepare some alternative balance sheets that maybe make the numbers look a little different, and let's circle back up or whatever, something along those lines. So Caroline testified that she then went and prepared 7 alternative balance sheets, and we did get to see this. So in court, we were shown an Excel spreadsheet. Apparently the original copy was a Google sheet, but they then moved it to an Excel spreadsheet. So for the sake of being in court, so in court we saw an Excel spreadsheet with 8 tabs. The first tab was called main, and then there were alt 1, alt 2, alt 3, all the way alt 7. And the only alt we looked at was the alt 7 sheet, because that was the one apparently that Sam selected. Sam told her to go, that alt 7 looked good, and that was the one she should send to Genesis. So let's talk about the difference between the main balance sheet and the alt 7 balance sheet that ultimately was actually sent to Genesis, which, by the way, this then spurred a pattern that we saw through all of the balance sheets they would ultimately send externally. Here's the high level. Here's what matters, because again, it's hard to talk about numbers without looking at spreadsheets. The biggest thing that Caroline sought to do was to obscure the fact that at that point, Alameda had borrowed $9.9 billion from FTX, something in that ballpark. And FTX didn't have that money. Like, they hadn't made that much in profits. So that money was being borrowed from customers. This was very widely understood by all the top executives. Caroline understood that that's what was happening. She testifies. Sam absolutely understood that that was what was happening. I totally believe he knew that. We'll talk about what smoking guns he's tied to or not a little bit at the end here, but she wanted to obscure the fact that this $9.9 billion was being borrowed by Alameda from FTX. So on the internal balance sheets, the main balance sheet that was only between her and Sam, that $9.9 billion was called FTX borrows. That's the line item. It was listed as an FTX borrows, and it was listed as a liquid liability. What that means is she was acknowledging the fact that customers could recall their money at any time, which meant that that was a liability because it was money they owed, and it was a liquid liability in the sense that it wasn't like a fixed-term loans where nobody could ask for their money back for 3 months or something. Like, customers could ask for it back at any moment in time. So it was a $9.9 billion liquid liability, which is quite risky. If you have $9.9 billion that you owed, that could be recalled at any time. That's what she had listed in the main account she shared internally. On the external document, the alt 7 that she actually sent to Genesis and ultimately other lenders, that line item disappeared. Suddenly there was no more FTX borrows line item, $9.9 billion, liquid liabilities. She offset part of that $9.9 billion with the $4.5 billion in venture investments that had been made. Okay, let me break this down. We talked yesterday, we've talked before about the fact, maybe it wasn't yesterday, but whenever it was, about the fact that a number of FTX executives, Gary Wang, Nishad Singh, Ryan Salem, and Sam Bankman-Fried, all took ranging from hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in loans from Alameda to make investments in companies that they wanted to invest in, including one like Anthropic, which I imagine will come up at some point. Folks may know about it. And they wanted to make it from their personal accounts. The speculation is that it was more tax advantageous. That for some reason they wanted to make it in their personal names as opposed to in the name of Alameda or FTX. So they borrowed a ton of money from Alameda, and Alameda loaned them a ton of money to make these venture investments. And that was listed on the spreadsheet as a long-term asset. That was long-term because that wasn't liquid money. It wasn't like they could get out of those investments easily. A lot of that was venture capital, early stage companies, whatever. So basically what Caroline did in the external version of the balance sheet is she took out the related party investments. That was the line item. She took out related party investments. That was $4.5 billion worth, which was an asset for them. She subtracted it from the $9.9 billion in liability to get whatever number you get there, right? 4 and change, like some smaller number. And then she turned that 4 and change number, she listed that as a long-term loan. So that's how she started to account for things. And the way she did it basically meant that the NAV, the net asset value, basically if you subtract liabilities from assets, the number would be the same as the number they got on their main balance sheet. So those numbers match the net positive or whatever. The NAV, it's called the net asset value. But she suddenly made the balance sheets look way less risky because she subtracted a long-term asset that they had from a short-term liquid liability that they had, and then took the remaining balance of the short-term liquid liability and pretended it was a long-term liability. And this is the spreadsheet that Sam said, this is the one that looks good. Let's go send that to lenders. So she sent that to Genesis. And then what we saw then from starting in June, that happened from June to November, she continued to send balance sheets to lenders that continued this general practice where whatever money they were borrowing from customers that FTX borrows that would be listed on an internal balance sheet, that magically went away. And suddenly you just had more long-term loans. And also it had the benefit, I suppose, maybe in their mind, of taking away these related party asset pieces, which if you dug into it was the executives of FTX borrowing a shit ton of money from Alameda in order to make venture investments. Needless to say, obviously all of this is quite shady. It shows intent to defraud investors. Now, the only thing we don't have here is true smoking gun, that we don't have like proof that Sam looked at some of these documents. We have Caroline's word that he looked at these documents and that he directed her. I absolutely believe her. We saw signal chats later that just really illustrate to me that she was definitely listening to Sam in a lot of ways. But anyway, there's no total smoking gun there. Okay, now I want to talk about these related party loans, these venture investments that were being made. This was a huge takeaway for me from the last 2 days. There was a point we were looking at balance sheets as of June 2022. And what was really striking is that had these 4.5 closing in on $5 billion worth of venture investments, had those not been made, Alameda would have been liquid enough to cover all customer deposits. So there's about $9.9 billion in money owed to customers. And then they had whatever it was. I think they listed like $7 billion worth of liquid assets. In fact, that was what it was. They listed that they had $7 billion worth of liquid assets. They did not, because they were including like a bunch of FTT. They were including $3 billion worth of FTD in those liquid assets. And if they'd actually tried to sell $3 billion worth of FTT, the price would have collapsed and it would no longer have been a liquid coin. So that $7 billion of like liquid asset number wasn't real. It was more like $4 or $5 billion. But anyways, they had $4 or $5 billion in liquid assets. If that $5 billion in venture investments had stayed liquid instead of going into these long-term, early speculative investments, they would have been able to cover their customer debt. Now, why do I think that this is important? This is important because yesterday, Caroline testified that the loans that were made to Sam and others, oftentimes, she didn't even know that they were happening. Even though the loans were being made by Alameda, she wasn't always the Alameda signatory on them. All of those loans were at the direction of Sam. And we heard this corroborated in Gary Wang's testimony. Gary was very clear that he signed these promissory notes to take out these massive loans for these investments because Sam told him to, because lawyers at FTX told him to. So I feel very confident, based on what we've heard, that those loans were really like a Sam pet project, if anything. Like he was really interested in making venture investments. He made personal investments in Robinhood. At one point we heard today he was interested in trying to acquire Snap or buy shares of Snap. I don't know that that ever happened, but point being, like, this was a Sam pet project. And when I look at the balance sheet as of June 2022, and it changed a little bit over time, that $5 billion was to me the biggest, like, if you'd only had that back, you would have been okay. And yet Sam continued to make investments between June and November of 2022, including some investments in Modulo, which was another trading firm we talked about a bit. And so I think that's really interesting because we know that the defense is going to try and pin this all on Caroline. That Sam, even in the way he's talked, has tried to pin a lot of this on Caroline. And specifically has tried to pin this on Caroline, saying that she didn't hedge enough. And we did get into that. I'll say one thing on that in a moment. But I'm looking at these balance sheets being like, this seems like a Sam problem. This seems like a problem because Sam was obsessed with, I don't know, venture capital, I guess. Okay, now let's talk about the hedging a little bit because it did come up today. This is something we've heard before. Basically, Sam saying Caroline didn't hedge enough, and that was the problem. So Caroline testified that in September of 2022, we're starting to see like the beats that matter. June 2022 was an important month. September 2022 was an important month. November 2022 is an important month. In September of 2022, Caroline and Sam had a meeting in which Sam really laid into her. It sounds like he kind of yelled at her. She didn't use that word, but she said he was speaking really loudly and basically said, it's your fault that Alameda's in such a terrible position. I told you to hedge. You didn't hedge. This is all your fault. Caroline says that she started crying. She was really upset. And that she thought that some of that accusation was fair, that she said there's lots of things I would have done differently, but that it was an incomplete picture. I think she did reference the venture investments as being part of the problem. She also said that what Sam had told her to do at one point was to short the NASDAQ. And she said, it wasn't clear to me at the time that that would have actually been an effective hedge for what we were doing. So she kind of caveated it, but she acknowledged it. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the defense handles this question in cross-examination in terms of pushing her on it's your fault because you didn't hedge enough. I gotta do this last bit in the last few minutes here because I've got an event starting very soon. I want to talk to you about this like left field bombshell moment in which Caroline comes out and says that Sam and other executives at Alameda bribed Chinese government officials and that Thai prostitutes were involved. So we're going to get to that in just one moment, but we do need to hear one final word from our amazing sponsors, OpenSea, Ledger, and Web3 Cents, who make this show possible. I am so grateful to you all. Let's hear from them.
Y'all know the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto. Well, in a world where too many people have had to learn that the hard way, Overpriced JPEGs is proud to partner with Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. Ledger's Nano S Plus and Nano X hardware wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, Ledger's own software for setting up your Nano device and managing your crypto assets, is the easiest way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control of your digital assets. You can use all your favorite dApps with Ledger Live, accessing 15 plus Web3 apps, including 1inch, Paraswap, Lido, and Zerion. So you can not only manage, but also grow your portfolio. And Ledger Live is available on mobile and desktop. Securing digital assets shouldn't be complicated. Ledger is as easy as it gets. Uncompromising security, effortless connectivity, full transparency, Ledger is your one-stop shop to trade and track crypto, grow your assets, and manage NFTs. Secure your future with Ledger. Visit shop.ledger.com today or check out the link in the show notes.
Let me tell you about OpenSea Studio. Yes, you know OpenSea. Perhaps you use OpenSea, but did you know they launched OpenSea Studio? It's a one-stop shop for all creators to launch and manage their projects. Using OpenSea Studio, you can create and manage a drop end-to-end, including setting up allow list phases, uploading media and metadata, which has helpful preview functionality, and building the drop page itself. You can also mint an NFT or collection where the creator owns the contract. OpenSea Studio lets you build on all blockchains compatible with OpenSea, and there are 8 of them. Lets buyers mint an NFT from your collection using a credit or debit card, and there are no coding or technical skills required to do any of the above. OpenSea will be adding more features and functionality to OpenSea Studio over the coming months, including revamped collection pages with new storytelling modules, and more ways to leverage NFT technology, including redeemables, which y'all know I'm a huge fan of, and analytics. I'm an OpenSea user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the NFT ecosystem, supporting, as I said, 8 chains in 8 global languages. And because I trust the systems they've built to help keep the space safe, like copyment protection, malicious URL detection or removal, robust verification, and more. It is why they are the place to buy, sell, and now create NFTs. Check them out at the link below, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Okay, so there's been some tweets flying around about this. Caroline was asked, did you ever speak in coded language with Sam about shady things that y'all were doing? And she said yes. And the example she gave was that in 2021, in late 2021, $1 billion of Alameda's money basically got locked up in some Chinese crypto exchanges. She mentioned OKX, and there was one other one, that Wagi, maybe people know it. I don't remember the specifics. And she said they tried a bunch of different things to get this money unlocked. One of the things they tried to do to unlock this money, and it wasn't entirely clear how this happened, but basically use accounts of Thai prostitutes to trade with Alameda, such that Alameda would lose money to these Thai prostitute accounts in the hopes that the money would be released from the Alameda accounts where it was locked to the Thai prostitute accounts where it was presumably unlocked so that they could withdraw this money. That did not happen. The strategy did not work, to be clear, but it was something that they tried in an effort to unlock this $1 billion. Ultimately, she testified that they spoke in coded language, but her understanding was that what they did do was bribe Chinese government officials to the tune of $100 million to unlock this $1 billion that was locked up in exchanges in China. So that was definitely an unexpected moment of testimony. And the judge had to make it clear, like, hey, Sam hasn't been charged with bribing Chinese government officials. So, just only take this as proof of their close relationship and of speaking in coded language. Like, don't take any more from this jurors than that. Okay, jumping back ahead in the timeline, because that happened in late 2021. And this is the other thing that's a little bit tricky about tracking the testimony of Caroline, is the prosecution jumps around a bit in the timeline, which can make you feel a little bit head spinny. But jumping ahead, we're back in September of 2022 as things are starting to fall apart. We reheard the story that we've now heard a number of times. Sam was considering shutting down Alameda. He discovered that wasn't going to be feasible because they owed $14 billion to FTX and customer deposits. So we reheard that story from Caroline's perspective. It's nothing shocking. She had a meeting with Gary and Nishad. She laid out why it was going to be really hard to shut down Alameda, whatever. I don't think there was anything there that was overly important to discuss. But let's move to November. What becomes very interesting in November is, again, we go through the story. We know November 6th, November 7th, November 8th. We saw Sam's tweets saying assets are fine. So we relitigated that whole November 6th, November 7th, November 8th thing, the thing we all lived through, the thing we've talked about here on the show, the thing that keeps coming up, because those were the moments when everything started to implode. CZ was tweeting that he was selling his stake in FTT. CoinDesk was reporting a balance sheet. Also, it was funny because this leaked Alameda balance sheet precipitated an initial crisis in some ways, an initial sell-off for FTX. And that was one of the external balance sheets that was leaked. So that looked better. That was like lying in the positive relative to the truth of their balance sheets. And it still freaked people out. So that just shows you how bad the unreported balance sheets were. But what's interesting, what happens in November is Caroline starts saving some of her Signal messages, presumably by screenshotting them, whereas historically, the entire company communicated via Signal with messages that were set to delete automatically after a week. So we have so little direct communication between any of these players and Sam because they were all lost to Signal chats. But in November, Caroline and others, it sounds like, were starting to get nervous about what was going on, and so started to save a very limited number of Signal chats. So for the first time, it feels like we actually start hearing or seeing messages directly from Sam. We've seen a little bit of that in the past. What this made me realize was Sam did a pretty good job of CYA, like of covering his own ass. While I think he's very guilty, I think the jury will find him guilty. I think the witnesses have felt very credible, and it is very clear to me, hearing from these witnesses, that Sam was behind everything and was really directing things. There's a lack of physical evidence tying him to it. We have some comments on documents here, a document that clearly indicated that customer money was going to be used, but not in explicit terms. Like, we have a little bit of it, but it's not like, oh, he's talking about it openly in a chat and we have him nailed. And that really became clear to me as I finally did start to see some Signal chats with him. So let's talk about a couple of these. We saw Signal chats between Caroline and Sam, where Sam is listing out the assets that he understands them to have and the totals. Like, hey, my understanding is that we've got $3.9 billion worth of liquid assets, but we've got $12 billion of possible customer withdrawals. That leaves us $8.1 billion in the hole. That, of course, ultimately was what they ended up in the hole, but he's messaging that in a Signal chat with Caroline, like confirming it. But here's an interesting message. So in November, Caroline Ellison sends in a Signal chat, Ryan, that's Ryan Salem, Ryan is asking me if we can cover all withdrawals. What should I say? And then Sam Bankman-Fried responds, maybe something like, we can meet a ton, though it's already getting large. I don't know. And the I don't know was out of the quote. So say that first part to Ryan, but then he's being like, I don't know. What's interesting, Caroline testified, of course, like their historical practice was not to share what they were actually doing with customer money. But in this moment, she said she felt like the writing was on the wall. Things were starting to collapse. Like, it was time to just get honest. So that's why she was asking Sam, like, should I just tell him the truth, essentially? So I do see this as a semi-smoking gun. Like, clearly Sam was not like jarred by this, being like, we should say that we can meet all the withdrawals, because of course we can, because isn't that like, of course obviously he knew, and obviously he had known that they did not have enough liquid assets to cover withdrawals. And that's, to me, again, that's the main crime here. No matter how else you want to spin it, if you want to spin it like, well, he thought he could make the money back or this or that, whatever, like, he was okay with using customer money, that's your key issue right there. Okay, last two things, and then we're gonna hop. So we did see Caroline Ellison's $22 tweet. This is a tweet in which, after CZ said he was going to sell all of his FTT, Caroline then responded being like, Alameda's happy to buy it from you for $22. We talked about the fact that Alameda did then start buying FTT for about $22 or whatever, which helped stabilize the price at $22. But the money they were using to do that was the only liquid money they had, which was the money they had taken from FTX customers that they were going to need to repay. So it was all this strategy of like, maybe we can stabilize things and buy ourselves enough time for Sam to get us an injection of money. But in their process of trying to stabilize things, they were also spending the very money that ultimately could have been given back to customers. So like, that gets very thorny, and seeing that behind the scenes, and we're seeing some of that play out, the conversations about that tweet, et cetera, play out in Signal chats was really interesting. And then the last thing is something I was so disappointed about, which is that we did not get the tape, this infamous tape of Caroline Ellison at an all-hands meeting with all of the Alameda employees, where she was asked, whose decision was it to use customer deposits to pay back lenders? And she says, Sam's, I guess. This was like this very famous moment where we have this on tape. Why that tape, I think, was important is She has a deal with the government that got talked about. The prosecutors talked about the fact that she has this deal with the government. It is one thing for Caroline Ellison, now in hindsight, sitting on the stands to say, I did all of this at Sam's behest, when she's got a cooperation agreement and she's trying to stay out of jail. It's a whole nother thing to hear Caroline Ellison say that a year ago when she thought everything was starting to be fine. She made that comment to the Alameda team when she thought Binance and CZ were going to buy FTX and bail them out and save the customer money. So that feels like a very interesting moment in time to get to hear her say that. We didn't get the tape. They didn't play it. They talked about the all hands meeting, but they didn't play that tape. It seems like maybe it's not being allowed. There was apparently some motion, like there were some motions to try and keep that out of court. And my assumption is that if they didn't play it, it's because the judge told them they couldn't play it in court. Because otherwise I can't imagine why they wouldn't want to play that tape. Okay, the actual last moment I want to talk about is there was a message that showed up. This is the moment when Caroline cried. The prosecution showed her a message thread with her and Sam, where it initially said, she was like, if things get much worse, I don't know that I'm gonna be able to handle it. That was like a previous message she had clearly sent. And then what we saw was her responding to her own message. And she said, wow, this was a bad prediction. I feel better than I've felt in months. And then Sam said like, wow, because shit's exciting. Like he was clearly like, what the fuck? And because she was sending this in like November of 2022 as everything was blowing up and she's saying she feels good. And then what the message she responded with was, I just feel so relieved. So the prosecution asked her about this and Caroline started to get teary. And she was like, look, that was the worst week of my life. This message does not really capture how I was feeling in aggregate. She was like, I had been dreading this moment, the moment when customers started to recall their funds in mass for so long, and my anxiety had been so high that there was a piece of me that was actually felt, and she didn't use this word, but like elated at one point that it was just all over, that I could come clean, that I could be honest, that I could take accountability. I know a lot of people are gonna feel very judgmental about that because they're like, look at all of the lives who were hurt by this. I really understand what she's saying. I do not think that this was somebody who felt happy about this for an entire week. I think this is somebody who was undoubtedly like hadn't slept, emotionally roller coastering because of everything that was going on, and had some really low lows, and then had some moments of, as she described, just relief that it had happened. But I spoke to specifically women, a number of other women who were there today, who all felt a lot of empathy for her. She started crying during that moment. I don't think it felt staged. Maybe some people did, and we all just felt like kind of bad for her. And look, she committed a crime, no doubt. She hurt a lot of lives, no doubt. She pled guilty, right? None of this is in dispute, but I did have empathy for her, and I believe her that a lot of this came at the direction of Sam. And sure, she absolutely should have talked to the FBI. She should have stopped this much, much earlier than she did. But I had sympathy for the position she was in. I had sympathy, I guess, for that specific emotion she was experiencing, which was, I felt relief in that moment, even though I also felt horrible. And she went on to say like how horrible she felt about what she did to customers, and that was when she was crying. And anyhow, okay, folks. That was day 6 of the SBF trial. I apologize if this one felt a little bit more chaotic. Again, I'm not in my usual setup. I'm on my laptop. I've got an event starting. In fact, my event started 5 minutes ago. I've got to go to it. But I'm really, really grateful for y'all listening and commenting. It's been so awesome to see your feedback. So please do like, subscribe, comment, tell me what you think. Tell me what you want to hear more of. You want to hear more about their relationship. Like, what are you interested in? So I can try and bring that to you. Tomorrow, we'll get the cross-examination of Caroline. Then we'll get the redirect. I think we'll probably be able to finish all of that up tomorrow. So tomorrow is probably the last day that Caroline is on the stand. And then we'll take it from there. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.